In my world, power isn't a gift. It's a ticking time bomb. We call them Espers, living weapons who slaughter monsters until their own magic drives them insane. And then there are the guides, people like me. Our job is to touch the soldiers, calm the madness, and keep them human. But there's a hierarchy to survival. I'm Ren, and I am an F-rank guide. In the eyes of the Union, that means I'm useless. While the S-Class guides live in luxury towers, wearing silk and smelling like expensive perfume, I'm the one scrubbing the blood and grime off the floors of the high-security wing just to pay my rent. I'm a walking battery with no charge. Invisible. A nobody. I've spent my whole life being told my energy is so weak I couldn't even cure a headache. I believed them. I really did. Until the afternoon, the world ended in the west hallway. I was halfway through mopping the floor when the alarm started screaming. Not the drill alarm. The code red alarm. Commander Silas has gone berserk. All personnel evacuate immediately. Commander Silas. He wasn't just an Esper. He was the apex. The strongest S-Class the nation had ever produced. They called him the God of War because he had never lost a battle. But he was losing the war inside his own head. He's the S-Class monster who vaporized his last 3 guides just by holding their hands. His energy is so violent it doesn't just burn. It turns people to ash. I dropped my mop and ran. My chest was tight, my breath hitching in my throat. I just wanted to get to the exit. But the building groaned, and the ceiling in front of me gave way. The dust was so thick. And then I saw him. He was on his knees, clutching his chest, his eyes. They weren't eyes anymore. They were pits of pure, blinding white light. Black lightning danced across his skin, cracking the floor tiles wherever he touched. When his head snapped up and he saw me, he didn't see a janitor. He saw a target. Before I could even scream, he moved. He was a blur. A physical weight that slammed me against the stone wall so hard the air left my lungs in a wheeze. His hand clamped onto my shoulder, his fingers brushing the skin of my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut. I waited for the heat. I waited for my body to disintegrate into a cloud of dust. I thought, this is it. At least I won't have to mop anymore. But the heat never came. Instead, a wave of cold washed over me. It was like stepping into a frozen lake after standing in a furnace. The moment his skin touched mine, he froze. I opened one eye, trembling. The crushing grip on my shoulder loosened, just enough for me to gasp for air. The terrifying white glow in his eyes was fading, melting back into a deep obsidian black. The black lightning that had been tearing the hallway apart simply vanished. He looked at his hand on my neck. Then he looked at me, confused, shocked. The noise. He rasped, his voice trembling. The screaming in my head. It stopped. I was too terrified to speak. My heart was hammering so loud I thought it would burst. I tried to slide down the wall, to crawl away, to get to safety. But he wouldn't let me go. He collapsed forward, inhaling sharply, a ragged, desperate sound, like a man who had been drowning and had finally broken the surface. Commander? Please, let me go. No, he growled, his arms wrapped around my waist, pinning me to him. You feel like silence. You feel like the cure. If you let go of me now, I think I'll lose my mind forever. So don't move. I stayed there, pinned to the nation's most dangerous man, until the heavy blast door at the end of the hall was ripped open. Commander Silas? It was the S-rank containment team, led by Lady Vesper. She was the nation's top guide, ethereal, untouchable, and the only person the algorithms deemed perfect enough to handle Commander Silas. She stopped dead. Her golden eyes widened in total disbelief. She didn't find a monster. She found a janitor in a dusty uniform, a nobody, with the God of War clinging to him like a lifeline. Her gaze raked over my cheap, stained jumpsuit, then flickered to the commander's hands locked tight around my waist. I saw her face twist, her shock curdling into a sudden, sharp fury. To her, I wasn't a person. I was an insult, a smudge on her perfect record. Step away from him, you filth, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. You're contaminating him. You have no idea what you're touching. The word filth hung in the air like a poison. I felt the heat of shame crawl up my neck, my fingers twitching to let go of the commander's tactical vest. I was a janitor. I didn't belong in the arms of a god. But as I tried to pull back, the commander's grip didn't just tighten. It became iron. The air in the hallway didn't just get cold. It turned heavy, like the atmospheric pressure had suddenly tripled. The flickering lights overhead didn't just buzz, they exploded. Filth? The commander's voice was a low, vibrating growl that seemed to come from the floorboards themselves. He finally lifted his head from my shoulder. His eyes weren't white anymore, but they weren't human either. They were a terrifying, swirling abyss of obsidian. He turned his gaze toward Lady Vesper. The perfect guide actually flinched. "Commander," she stammered, her golden aura flickering as she tried to regain her composure. "You're confused. The trauma of the Berserk state has clouded your mind. That thing you're holding is a low-rank peasant. He's probably draining what's left of your sanity. Step away and let me stabilize you." She reached out, her hand glowing with a beautiful shimmering light, the kind of power that cost the government billions to cultivate. "Don't touch me," Commander Silas hissed. Vesper froze, her hand inches from his arm. "Silas, I am your matched partner. I am the only one who can—" "You feel like needles," Silas interrupted, his voice dripping with raw disgust. "Every time you touch me, it feels like shards of glass in my veins. You don't bring peace, Vesper. You just paint over the cracks." He turned back to me, and his expression shifted so fast it made my head spin. The predatory hunger was gone, replaced by a desperate, almost holy reverence. He took my hand, the hand that still smelled like floor cleaner, and pressed it firmly against his heart. "But this one," he whispered, loud enough for the entire squad to hear. "He is the silence I've been hunting for my entire life." Suddenly, the captain of the containment team stepped forward, his rifle leveled at my chest. "Commander, the director's orders are clear. If the F rank is interfering with your recovery, we are authorized to use lethal force on the civilian to clear the interference." My heart stopped. I saw the red laser dot appear on my jumpsuit right over my heart. I froze. I was going to die because I was in the way. I felt Commander Silas's entire body go still. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence before a supernova. "You have 3 seconds to move that red dot off him," Commander Silas said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Or I stop holding back the lightning, and we all find out if this hallway can withstand a sun exploding inside it." Vesper's face went pale. "You wouldn't. You'd kill the boy too." Commander Silas looked down at me, a dark, beautiful smirk tugging at his lips. "He'll be fine," Commander murmured, his eyes locking onto mine. "He's a void, Vesper. Your perfect algorithms missed it. He doesn't just guide the lightning. He eats it." He looked back at the guards, his voice booming like thunder. 1. Commander Silas didn't count to 2. He just leaned into my ear, his breath hot against my skin, and whispered a lethal promise. "Let them fire, Ren. Fire and see if there will be a single soul left in this building." The captain's finger buckled. A deafening crack echoed through the hallway. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the bullet to tear through me. But it never touched me. I opened my eyes. The bullet was floating in the air, an inch from Commander Silas's palm. It hung there, vibrating, trapped in an invisible field of black static. Then, with a casual flick of Commander Silas's wrist, the bullet disintegrated into dust. The guards fell back in terror, realizing their mistake. They hadn't fired at a man. They had fired at a calamity. Commander Silas laughed, a low, dark sound of pure triumph. "My turn," he whispered against my lips. My heart skipped a beat. I was completely captivated by him. He didn't wait for them to fire again. He let go of my waist just long enough to slam his palms into the reinforced floor. The "my turn" wasn't a threat. It was a massacre. I watched, breathless, as the elite containment squad was tossed aside. Their Magi steel shields imploded. The captain who had pulled the trigger was sent flying through a concrete pillar. Even Lady Vesper was thrown back, her golden aura flickering and dying as the sheer pressure of Commander Silas's unfiltered rage sucked the oxygen out of the hallway. The alarms changed. They weren't code red anymore. A robotic, soulless voice began to chant, "Orbital strike authorized. Level 10 neutralization in 60 seconds. All units abandon the West Wing." Commander Silas turned back to me, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, possessive heat. He saw the fear in my eyes. He didn't want to leave because he was losing. He wanted to leave because they were about to drop a sun on our heads and it will kill me. "They'll destroy the whole wing just to get you, Ren," he growled, scooping me up in one arm and pulling me flush against his vibrating chest. "But they're too late. You're mine now." My goodness, amidst all this chaos, I'm still falling hard for Commander Silas. He's so handsome. "Hold your breath," he commanded. He lunged. The wind was a freezing blade against my skin, but I barely felt it. I was too busy being crushed against the tectonic plates of Commander Silas's chest, and I loved it. He held me as if I were the only valuable thing in a burning world, his boots throwing sparks against the reinforced glass as we slid down the side of the skyscraper. When we hit the ground, he didn't stumble. He hit the earth like a predator, his knees absorbing the impact, and before I could even draw a breath of fresh air, we were sprinting into the darkness of the surrounding forest. We ran until the sirens of the tower were nothing but a distant, dying hum. Finally, we reached it. A hidden bunker, buried deep beneath a mountain of jagged rock and overgrown vines. It was a relic of the old wars, a tomb of concrete and rusted iron. The heavy steel door groaned as Commander Silas shoved it closed. Then, the silence hit. And in that silence, I heard the sound of him breaking. He collapsed against the wall, his massive frame sliding down the cold concrete until he hit the floor. His breath came in jagged, wet gasps. The black veins on his skin weren't just glowing now. They were pulsing, vibrating with a violent energy that threatened to tear his muscles from his bones. The static was back, and without the dampeners of the tower, it was ravaging him. "Ren," he rasped. The way he said my name. It wasn't a command. It was a prayer. I looked at him, the god of war, stripped of his pride, shivering in the dark. In the dim light of the bunker's emergency sensors, his body looked like a landscape of violence and beauty. "I'm here," I whispered, stepping toward him. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Come. Closer," he growled, his obsidian eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying, raw hunger. "The noise. It's deafening. I can't breathe." I knelt between his thighs. The heat radiating off him was staggering. It was like standing in front of a wildfire. As I reached out, my fingers brushed the hard, sweat-slicked muscle of his abdomen, and in that moment, I wanted to kiss him. God help me, I actually wanted to. He let out a choked sound. "Give it to me," he choked out. "Take the noise. Take all of it." I didn't just touch him. I threw myself into him. I pressed my palms against his bare chest, right over his hammering heart, and I let the void open. The madness, the pain, the jagged, screeching static of his mind flooded into me. It should have killed me. Any other guide would have been turned to ash. But I wasn't a sponge. I was a vacuum. I drank the darkness. I pulled the black lightning out of his pores and into my own blood. I felt my back arch, a silent scream dying in my throat as the sheer, erotic intensity of the merging hit me. It wasn't just energy. It was him. I felt his rage, his bone-deep exhaustion, and most of all, his suffocating, obsessive need for me. He let out a long, low groan of pure, unadulterated relief. His arms, thick as my waist, snaked around me, pulling me flush against him. He wasn't just holding me, he was consuming me. His lips, hot against my skin, made me almost lose focus. "Don't stop," he whispered, his voice vibrating through my own chest. "I want to be empty. I want to be filled with nothing but you." I felt his hand slide down my back, his fingers digging into my jumpsuit. With one violent tug, he tore the zipper. I didn't care. I needed the skin-to-skin contact as much as he did. The violet light in my veins was screaming for more of his darkness. He pushed me back onto the cold floor, his weight pinning me down. The contrast between the freezing concrete and his burning skin made me gasp. He hovered over me, his eyes scanning my face with a possessiveness that made my toes curl. He looked like a man who had found a treasure in the middle of hell and was prepared to kill anyone who even looked at it. "You're mine," he rumbled, his hand sliding up, his thumb forcing my mouth open. "Do you understand, Ren? Every F-rank lie they told you. They were trying to hide you. They knew that if a man like me ever tasted a man like you, the world would never be able to control us again." He leaned down, his lips ghosting over mine, teasing, testing. I could taste the ozone on his breath. The black lightning on his skin was sparking against the violet aura of my skin, creating tiny electric pops of pleasure where we touched. "I'm addicted," he whispered, his voice dropping to a dark, dangerous velvet. "I'm a mad weapon, and you're the only fix I'll ever take. Tell me you won't leave. Tell me you're mine." "I'm yours," I moaned, my hands roaming over the broad expanse of his back, tracing the jagged scars. Every scar I touched sent a jolt of his history into my mind. The blood he'd shed, the isolation he'd endured. I wanted to heal all of it. I wanted to swallow his past and replace it with my own light. I didn't wait for another word from him. I pulled him close and kissed him. I was expecting him to throw me off, but then he pulled me even closer and kissed me so hard, a violent, possessive union that tasted like ozone and desperation. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was a claim. His tongue was a flame. Every touch from him felt like he was marking my soul, rewriting my DNA to match his own frequency. I felt his hand slide down, gripping my thigh, pulling me even tighter into the cradle of his hips. "More," he growled against my lips. "Ren, give me more." The intimacy was overwhelming. As the violet light of my void and the black lightning of his power swirled together in the dark bunker, the air began to hum. It was a low subsonic frequency that vibrated through the floorboards, through my bones, through the very core of my being. We weren't just Commander and Janitor anymore. We were a closed circuit, a storm and its anchor. Hours passed, though it could have been minutes. Eventually, the black lightning on his skin subsided, leaving him spent and breathing hard against my chest. He didn't pull away. He stayed there, his head resting on my shoulder, his fingers still locked tight in my hair. "If they find us," he whispered, his voice finally steady, "I'll kill them all before I let them put a hand on you. You're the only silence I've ever had, Ren. I'll burn the world to ash before I let it get loud again." I looked up at the bunker, the violet glow of my skin slowly fading as I processed the energy I had taken. I realized then that I was no longer a janitor. I was no longer a nobody. I was the anchor for a god. And I was quickly realizing that I liked the weight of my chains. "We have to be careful," I said. "Lady Vesper, she won't stop. She's obsessed with you." And in my mind, I thought, I'm actually jealous. Silas let out a dark, dry laugh. He lifted his head, his obsidian eyes focusing on mine with a terrifying intensity. "She's obsessed with the idea of me. She's obsessed with the commander. But you..." He leaned down, biting gently on my earlobe. "You're addicted to the man, and the man is hopelessly, dangerously addicted to you." He pulled me into his arms, rolling us over until I was draped over his chest. He looked at me with a gaze that was both tender and predatory. "Go to sleep, Ren. I'll keep the world away. But when you wake up, the training begins. If we're going to survive the tower, I need to teach you how to be a weapon as mad as I am." I closed my eyes, listening to the heavy, rhythmic beat of his heart. It was the only sound in the world that mattered. For the first time in my 25 years, the silence wasn't a hollow, lonely thing. It was warm. It was the weight of Silas's arm draped over my waist, the rhythmic thrum of his heart vibrating through my cheek. I drifted in a haze where time didn't matter. I didn't dream of the tower, or the blood on the floors, or the sneer on Lady Vesper's face. I only dreamed of Silas's eyes and the terrifying, beautiful realization that I was no longer a ghost. I was an anchor. When I finally opened my eyes, the bunker was still swathed in a thick, artificial twilight. The only light came from the dull red glow of the emergency sensors and the faint, flickering violet hue of my own skin. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was still draped over Silas's chest, my head tucked perfectly into the curve of his shoulder. He was still asleep, but even in rest, he was dangerously handsome, a masterpiece of lethal intent. His skin was a roadmap of violence, jagged white scars from rift beasts, circular burns from tower experiments, all of them etched into a body that felt like living granite. I watched the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. For a moment, he didn't look like a god of war. He looked like a man who had finally found a place where he didn't have to fight. As I reached out, my fingers hovering just inches from a scar over his heart, his eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess, no waking up. He went from dead sleep to predatory awareness in a fraction of a second. His obsidian eyes locked onto mine, dark and unreadable, before his grip on my waist tightened, pulling me up until our faces were inches apart. "You're awake," he rumbled. His voice was a low, gravelly vibration that made my stomach flip. I think so," I whispered. "How long was I out?" "Long enough," he said, his hand sliding up my spine, his fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck. He pulled me closer, his nose brushing mine. "I told you, Ren. When you woke up, the training begins. The tower is already hunting us. They've likely already sent the Seekers. We don't have the luxury of being weak anymore." He sat up, bringing me with him so that I was straddling his lap. The intimacy was sudden and overwhelming. I was hyper-aware of the heat of his thighs beneath mine, the way my thin, torn jumpsuit offered no protection against the raw intensity of his presence. "Silas," I breathed, my heart starting to race. "I'm an F rank. You heard the director. I'm a battery. I don't know how to be a weapon. The director is a fool who only understands what he can measure on a screen," Silas growled. He took my hands, placing them flat against his bare chest, forcing me to feel the pull of my own void. "They called you a battery, Ren, but they were wrong. What I feel from your touch, that's not a battery. That's a hunger." Under my palms, the black lightning began to stir. It wasn't the violent, mindless storm from the hallway. It was controlled, focused. It felt like 1,000 needles pricking my skin, a dark, jagged energy that wanted to swallow me whole. "Take it," Silas commanded. "It's too much," I gasped, my void starting to ache. "Don't just take it and hold it, Ren. That's what they taught you to do, so you'd be easier to control. I want you to cycle it, drink the madness, strip away the filth, and push the pure energy back into me. Feed me." I closed my eyes, trying to find that empty space inside me. The energy hit. I felt Silas's memories, and I felt the static, that high-pitched screeching that lived in the marrow of his bones. "Concentrate," he hissed. "Find the light, filter the rot, give it back to me, Ren." I screamed, a silent, internal sound. And then, something clicked. I didn't just soak up the energy, I moved it. I felt the jagged edges of his power smoothing out as they passed through the center of my being. I stripped away the filth and I pushed the purified energy back into his heart. Silas let out a sound I will never forget. It was a low, guttural moan of such pure, unadulterated ecstasy that it made my entire body go limp. His head fell back against the concrete wall, his eyes fluttering shut as my light flooded his system. His grip on my waist became almost painful, his fingers digging into my hips as he surrendered to the sensation. "God," he gasped, his chest heaving. "Ren, it's better than anything. It's better than the silence." This was the start of it. We didn't just hide in that bunker. We evolved. The first few days had been a blur of survival, me drinking Silas's madness just to keep his heart from stopping. But once the immediate danger of the Berserk state passed, the dynamic changed. Silas wasn't just a patient anymore, and I wasn't just his medicine. He was a predator who had found his only source of peace, and he was determined to turn that source into a weapon. The training became our new reality. It was a cycle of pain and pleasure that blurred together until I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. He would provoke the static, letting the black lightning dance across his knuckles until the air smelled of burnt ozone, just so I would have to feed him again. I was becoming addicted to the way he looked at me when he was full of it. He became terrifyingly possessive. If I moved to the far corner of the bunker to find a ration pack, his eyes followed me like a hawk tracking its prey. If I sat too long in silence, he would pull me back. I fell first, but he fell harder. "You're claiming every inch of me," I whispered one night. We were tangled together on the thin cot, the air thick with the scent of our combined energy. Every time we cycle, I feel your power sinking deeper into my marrow, like you're rewriting me from the inside out. "Good," he rumbled, his lips ghosting over the back of my neck, his hand sliding possessively over my hip. "I want you so full of me that the tower's sensors won't even recognize you. I want you to realize that Vesper and the director, they don't even deserve to breathe the same air as you." He turned me around, forcing me to straddle him again. The power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't the janitor anymore, and he wasn't just the commander. We were a closed loop, a storm and its void. "The tower is going to send seekers, Ren," he murmured, his thumb tracing the lower curve of my lip. "They're going to come for their weapon, but they don't realize I'm not their weapon anymore. I'm yours, and I will tear the world apart before I let them put a hand on you again." He kissed me then. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise. I felt the violet light in my veins. But as Silas pulled me closer, his heart thundering against mine, the world outside finally caught up. Silas froze. His body went from relaxed to lethal in a fraction of a second. The bunker's external sensors began to scream a dull red warning. "Seekers," he hissed. "How?" I whispered, the cold hand of fear clutching at my throat. "It doesn't matter," Silas growled, a dark, predatory smirk pulling at his lips. He looked back at me, his eyes glowing with that terrifying violet obsidian. "Let them come. I've been waiting to show them what happens when you try to tear a man away from his only salvation." He grabbed my hand, interlacing our fingers, our energies surging together in a blinding flash. "Stay with me, Ren. When the door goes down, I want you to drink every ounce of power they bring. Leave them empty. Leave them hollow." The heavy steel door began to vibrate, the sound of a sonic drill chewing through the lock. I stood in Silas's shadow, my hands glowing with a fierce, hungry light. I wasn't the janitor anymore. I was the god of war's addiction, his only anchor in a world of madness. And as the bunker door began to cave inward, I felt the violet light in my veins turn from a hum to a roar. I was about to show the tower exactly why they should have never left a god in their gutters. The door imploded. The heavy steel door didn't just open, it disintegrated. The sound was a high-frequency shriek, a weaponized sonic blast designed to shatter bone and liquefy the internal organs of anyone in its path. In the tower, I would have been dead before I could even blink. My brain would have turned to mush, my heart stopping before the first vibration even hit the wall. But I wasn't the filth from the tower anymore. I wasn't the janitor who spent his life looking at the floor. The vibration hit me, and for a split second, I felt the familiar sharp sting in my ears. But before the pain could take hold, the violet light in my veins roared to life. It didn't feel like a hum anymore. It felt like a hungry, predatory beast waking up after a long sleep. My void didn't wait for the energy to hit. It reached out and snatched it from the air. I didn't fall to my knees. I stood my ground, my feet planted firmly in the wreckage. The sonic wave hit the space around me and simply vanished. I felt the frequency entering my chest, but instead of shattering my mind, it felt like a cold, refreshing drink after a long walk through a desert. My void was hungry, and the tower had just served me the first course. "Ren!" Silas barked. He had already lunged toward me, his massive frame moving to shield me, his black lightning prepared to act as a wall against the blast. But he stopped mid-step. His obsidian eyes widened as he saw me standing tall in the center of the dust and smoke, my skin glowing with a fierce, pulsing violet light. I wasn't cowering. I was smiling. "It's okay, Silas," I whispered, my voice carrying through the hum of the dampeners with a new, terrifying clarity. "I'm still hungry." I looked toward the doorway. The smoke cleared, revealing the squad of high-security sentinels. In front of them stood Vixen, the S-Class Seeker. He was holding a heavy, industrial-grade sonic emitter, his pale face twisted in a mask of pure confusion. He increased the frequency, the device in his hands glowing a bright, angry blue. But it didn't matter. The more he turned it up, the stronger I felt. "How are you still standing, you little rat?" Vixen hissed, his voice trembling. "That blast should have turned you to ash." "Your algorithms were wrong, Vixen," I said, stepping forward. I reached out and took Silas's hand, our fingers interlacing. The contact was electric. The black lightning from his skin and the violet light from mine swirled together, creating a pressure so intense. "You didn't find a janitor in this hole," I growled, my eyes locking onto his. "You found the one thing in this world that can eat you alive. You should have never let a god rot in your gutters." Silas let out a dark, predatory laugh. "Did you hear him, Seeker? The janitor is gone. You're looking at the only person in this world who gets to feed on me." Vixen's eyes flickered with the first hint of real fear. He looked back at Lady Vesper, who was watching us, her face a mask of loathing and jealousy. To her, this wasn't a mission. It was a personal insult. She saw the way Silas was looking at me, with pride, with hunger, and with absolute devotion. "Fire!" Vesper screamed. "Shoot the boy! Kill him now!" The sentinels didn't hesitate. A dozen rifles leveled at us, their muzzles glowing with mana energy. But Silas didn't move to shield me this time. He just stood there, heaving with a violent, beautiful pride, waiting to see what his addiction was going to do next. "Go ahead, Ren," Silas whispered in my ear, his breath hot and grounding. "Show them why I'll never need another guide. Show them what happens when you try to starve a god." I didn't wait for the bullets to reach us. I reached out with my void and pulled. The mana energy didn't fire from the guns. It was sucked out of the chambers. I felt the heat of the rifles as they overloaded, the violet light in my palms turning into a blinding sun. I drank the energy of a dozen S-Class in a single breath. "My turn," I whispered, repeating Silas's words. I didn't use lightning. I used a pulse of void energy. It swept across like a silent wave. The sentinels didn't even have time to scream before they were lifted off their feet and slammed into the bunker walls, their armor crumpling like tin foil. Vixen was thrown back, his sonic emitter exploding in his hands. Silence returned, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of total dominance. I turned to Silas, my skin humming with the stolen power. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he might lunge for me right there. The obsidian in his eyes was hooded, dark with a mixture of lust and reverence. He reached out, his hand sliding up my neck, his thumb forcing my chin up so I had to look at him. "You're a terrifying thing, Ren," he rumbled, his voice dropping to a subsonic growl. "And God help me, I've never wanted you more." He leaned down, his lips ghosting over mine, but before he could claim the kiss, a new sound echoed. A cold, mechanical click. "How touching," Lady Vesper said, stepping over the unconscious bodies of her guards. She wasn't holding a rifle. She was holding a small, black device with a pulsing red light. "The janitor thinks he's a god, but even gods have a kill switch." I felt a sudden, sharp vibration in the back of my neck, the spot where the tower had implanted my ID chip years ago. "The neural dampener," Silas hissed, his grip on me tightening. "Not just a dampener, Silas," Vesper smiled, her eyes wide with a manic, jealous light. "It's a frequency override. If I can't have your silence, then no one can." She pressed the button. The world didn't just go dark. It turned into a cacophony of agony. The void I had worked so hard to build was suddenly turned against me. The energy I had just eaten didn't disappear. It stayed trapped in my marrow, turning into jagged shards of glass that shredded my nerves from the inside out. I fell. My own power was being weaponized against me. I let out a strangled cry, my body arching in Silas's arms as my vision began to fracture into violet sparks. "Ren!" Silas roared. He tried to hold me, but the black lightning on his skin was reacting to the dampener too. We were being forcibly torn apart by the very energy that had united us. Vesper walked toward us. She looked down at me with a cold, triumphant smile. She leaned over, her face inches from mine, her golden eyes reflecting my agony. "You were a mistake, Ren," she whispered. "A glitch in the system, and glitches get erased. Take the commander. Put the boy in the black box. I want him kept alive until the director can extract every drop of that void marrow from his bones. I watched, paralyzed as they swarmed us. Silas fought like a dying lion, his roars shaking the bunker, but without my touch to ground him, the static returned with the force of a tidal wave. He was foaming at the mouth, his eyes rolling back to white as they slammed the level 10 restraints onto his wrists. "Ren," he mouthed, blood leaking from his eyes. Then everything went black. The first thing I felt was the cold. It wasn't the natural cold of the bunker or the chill of the night air. It was a sterile, chemical cold that seemed to seep directly into my bones. My head throbbed with the rhythmic, biting pulse of the neural dampener still buried in the base of my skull. Every time I tried to move, a jagged spike of white-hot electricity shot through my spine, pinning me back down. I opened my eyes, but the world was a blur of fluorescent white. I was strapped to a magisteel table, my arms and legs held by heavy, reinforced leather restraints. I was naked under a thin, paper-white hospital gown that felt like sandpaper against my skin. "Subject is conscious," a cold, mechanical voice droned. I turned my head, the movement causing a wave of nausea. Through a massive wall of reinforced glass, I saw him. My heart shattered. Silas was in the room next to mine. The black box. He was chained to the floor. They had him under a constant suppressive field, force-feeding him artificial static through the air vents to keep him in a state of permanent, agonizing madness. "Silas!" I tried to scream his name, but my voice was nothing but a dry, pathetic rasp. "He can't hear you, Ren." The door to my chamber hissed open. Lady Vesper stepped in, looking as pristine and untouchable as ever. She stood over me, her golden eyes filled with a sick, triumphant glow. She leaned down, her scent, perfume and ozone, making my stomach turn. "Look at him," she whispered, gesturing toward the glass. "That is the god of war without his fix. He's pathetic, isn't he? A mindless animal clawing at the dirt because his little janitor isn't there to pet him." She reached out, her fingers, cold as ice, tracing the line of my collarbone. "The director wants your marrow, Ren. He wants to see how your void works. But I want to see you break. I want to see the moment you realize that you were never a god. You were just a lucky mistake." She turned to the observation window and nodded. "Begin the overload," the director's voice commanded over the intercom. Suddenly, the wires attached to my temples and chest surged. They weren't just testing me. They were using me as a conduit. They began to funnel the static, the raw, unfiltered madness of every dying Esper in the facility, directly into my void. I screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It felt like my soul was being shredded by 1,000 jagged blades. I felt the collective agony of 100 men who had lost their minds to the power. I saw blood, I heard screams, I felt the crushing weight of 1,000 deaths. "Take it," Vesper hissed, her face inches from mine, her eyes wide with a manic intensity. "Eat it, you little freak. Show us how much that void can hold before you pop." Through the glass, I saw Silas react. Even through the suppression field, he felt my pain. He surged to his feet, his chains rattling with a violent force. He slammed his fists against the glass, his mouth open in a silent, desperate roar. Blood began to leak from his eyes, his black lightning turning red with the sheer force of his rage. "Ren, Ren, look at me." I could hear his voice in my head, a tether in the storm of madness. "You're hurting him," he gasped out, my vision fracturing into violet sparks. "Stop. Please. He's hurting because of you." Vesper laughed, her hand glowing with a shimmering gold light as she pressed it against my chest, manually forcing more energy into me. "If you die, he becomes a perfect weapon again. He'll forget your name in a week." But as the madness flooded into me, something changed. The pain reached a peak, a point of no return. And then, it vanished. In its place came a deep, predatory hunger. The more static they pumped into me, the bigger the void became. I looked at Vesper. I saw the gold of her aura, the S-Class power she was so proud of. It didn't look intimidating anymore. It looked like food. "Is that all?" I whispered. Vesper froze. "What?" I said, "Is that all you've got?" I didn't wait for her to answer. I reached out, my hand moving with a speed that defied the dampeners, and I clamped my fingers around her wrist. The taste of S-Class guide energy was unlike anything I had ever imagined. It felt like honey, thick, sweet, and intoxicating. For 25 years, I had walked through the world feeling hollow, but as I drained the nation's top guide, that hole began to fill. I drank her pride, her strength, her very essence. Vesper's scream was a thin, pathetic sound that was quickly swallowed by the roar of the laboratory alarms. I watched as the golden glow in her eyes flickered and died. Her skin, usually as flawless as porcelain, began to pale, her strength withering under the sheer, gravitational pull of my void. "Ren, stop," she gasped, her body sagging. You're killing me." "You called me filth, Vesper," I whispered, my voice sounding deeper, vibrating with a power that wasn't mine. I sat up, the leather strap snapping like thread. I leaned in, mirroring the way she had tortured me. "You said I was a glitch, but look at you now. You're nothing but a meal." I felt a surge of dark, erotic triumph. I drank until she was nothing but a shell, her body hitting the floor with a heavy thud as my grip finally released her. She wasn't dead, but she was empty. She would never guide again. The director was screaming now. "Neutralize him! Use the gas! Flood the chamber!" I didn't even look at him. My eyes were locked on the glass cage across the room. Silas was no longer punching the glass. He was vibrating. The black lightning on his skin had turned into a swirling storm of obsidian shadows, his muscles bulging until they looked ready to tear through his skin. He was watching me with an expression that was purely primal, a mixture of agonizing lust and protective fury. "Silas," I breathed. I didn't use my hands. I simply reached out with my mind, feeling the energy I had stolen from Vesper in the building's power grid. I shaped it into a jagged blade of violet light and shattered the reinforced glass of his cell. The sound was like a thunderclap. Silas didn't walk out of that cage. He erupted from it. He moved like a shadow, a blur of raw, physical power. Before the guards could even raise their rifles, he was among them. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. He didn't use lightning. He used his bare hands, tearing through magi-steel armor as if it were parchment. He was a beast unleashed. Once the room was a wreckage of broken metal, Silas turned. He was covered in the dust of the glass and the blood of his enemies. He walked toward me, his obsidian eyes burning with a light that made my breath catch in my throat. He didn't undo the remaining straps on my waist with his hands. He leaned down and bit through them, his teeth grazing my skin, his hot breath ghosting over my bare stomach. The moment the last strap snapped, I was in his arms. He didn't just hold me. He reclaimed me. His mouth crashed against mine with intense kiss that tasted like desperation. It was a violent, tongue-twisting union, his hands roaming over my body. He pressed me back against the table, his massive weight pinning me down, his thighs forcing mine apart. "Ren," he growled against my lips. "My Ren. I thought I'd lost you." "I'm here," I moaned, my hands tangling in his dark, sweat-matted hair. "I'm here, Silas, and I'm full. I'm so full of them." I could feel the energy I had stolen vibrating inside me, a restless violet ocean. It was too much for my human frame to hold alone. I was beginning to ache, my skin feeling too tight. "Give it to me," Silas whispered, his lips ghosting over the mark he had left on my neck in the bunker. "Drink me, and then let me drink you. I want to feel what you've become." It was the most intimate thing we had ever done. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him flush against me, and I opened the floodgates. I didn't just take his static this time. I gave him the stolen energy of the tower. I pushed Vesper's golden power and the laboratory's electricity into his marrow, cycling it through my void and purifying it until it was a brilliant, shimmering violet. The reaction was explosive. Silas's back arched, a low, guttural roar tearing out of his chest. His skin began to glow, the black veins of corruption turning a vivid, electric purple. We were a closed circuit, our souls merging in a kaleidoscope of light and heat. It was more than a stabilization. It was an ascension. I felt his pleasure as if it were my own. a white-hot spike of ecstasy that made my vision blur. He wasn't just a mad weapon anymore. He was something divine. He pulled back, his eyes now glowing a brilliant, solid violet. He looked like a god of the stars, his skin radiating a calm, crushing pressure. "God," he gasped, his forehead resting against mine. "Ren, what did you do to me?" "I made you mine," I whispered, my voice trembling with a new, dark confidence. "I made you the weapon they can never control." The director was cowering in the corner, his tablet shattered. Silas turned his head slowly, the violet glow in his eyes settling on the man who had treated him like an animal for a decade. "You wanted to study the void?" Silas asked. He raised his hand, and the atmospheric pressure in the room tripled. The laboratory equipment began to crumple, the steel beams groaning as they bent under his will. "Wait," I said, my hand finding Silas's chest. I looked at the director, then at Vesper, who was barely conscious on the floor. I didn't want them dead. Death was too easy. "I want them to see," I said, my violet eyes meeting Silas's. "I want them to see what the filth can do. I want them to watch us walk out of here, and I want them to know that they have no power left. Not over you. Not over me." Silas looked at me, and a dark, beautiful smirk pulled at his lips, and give me a slow, possessive kiss, a promise of 1,000 nights to come. "Anything you want, Ren. The world is yours. I'm just the one who's going to break it for you." We walked out of the laboratory hand in hand. Every guard who tried to stop us was simply thrown aside by the invisible wall of Silas's aura. We walked through the great hall of the tower, where the S-Class elites usually gathered to mock the lower ranks. They saw the F-rank janitor glowing with the light of a star, and they saw the god of war, finally, at peace, looking at his guide with a devotion that bordered on worship. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. As we reached the massive front doors of the tower, Silas stopped. He looked back at the glass palace, his violet lightning flickering around his fingers. "They'll follow us," he said. "Let them," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. "I'm still hungry, Silas, and the more they send, the stronger we get." He held my hand, and we stepped out into the cool night air. We weren't just fugitives anymore. We were the beginning of the end. We didn't look back as we walked out of those massive tower doors. We had humiliated the Empire, and we knew they would never let that stain on their pride remain. We traveled for weeks, hiding in the gray zones, moving like ghosts through jagged mountain passes. Eventually, we found a small stone cabin, surrounded by pine trees and the sound of a rushing river. For 1 month, we lived a life that felt like a dream. I tended the garden. Silas chopped wood. Every night, we tangled our bodies together, our energies cycling in a slow, intimate rhythm. For 30 days, I saw the world through my own eyes. I saw the way the morning light caught Silas's scars. I saw the deep, obsidian love that lived in his gaze. I didn't know it was a countdown. It happened on a Tuesday. The National High Council didn't send a message. They sent an erasure. I was standing on the cliffs, the wind whipping my hair, when the sky above our valley suddenly caught fire. A fleet of 1,000 heavy combat cruisers, led by the National Enforcement Command, tore through the clouds. This wasn't the tower's soldiers. These were the state's executioners. They didn't wait to talk. "Target sighted. Initiate final sanction." The cold, robotic voice boomed from the lead ship. The sky turned a blinding red as hundreds of monocannons opened fire at once. I stood frozen, the sheer scale of the destruction racing toward us and paralyzing my heart. But I wasn't alone. "Ren, get behind me!" Silas roared. He leaped into the air, his body erupting in a storm of black and violet lightning. A massive, shimmering dome of energy formed above us as the first wave of mana shells slammed into his shield. The earth beneath my feet groaned, the cliffside cracking under the pressure. Silas was holding off an entire army. His muscles bulged. Blood began to leak from his nose as he absorbed the impact of 1,000 ships. "Ren, do it now!" He screamed over the roar of the explosions. "I can't hold them forever. Drink it. Drink all of it." I realized then that Silas wasn't just a shield. He was my time. He was giving his life to buy me the seconds I needed to save us. I fell to my knees, closed my eyes, and opened the void wider than I ever had before. I didn't just reach for the energy Silas was holding back. I reached for the soldiers themselves. Every ship, every cockpit, every drone. I felt the static inside 1,000 soldiers, the jagged, filthy madness the Council used to keep them obedient. Mindless weapons wrapped in chains they couldn't see. It was disgusting. It felt like oily black sludge flooding into my soul. I screamed as the filth hit me. My void shrieked. My bones vibrated as if they were turning to glass under the pressure. I was swallowing the collective madness of an entire nation. Behind my eyelids, the world turned a searing, violent violet. "Ren, stay with me." Silas's voice was a desperate anchor. He had dropped to one knee. His shield flickered as the cruisers initiated the Omega Protocol. A massive, concentrated beam of pure erasure aimed directly at us. I felt Silas's heat beside me, his energy merging with my void, giving me the strength to endure. "I've got it," I gasped, the pain behind my eyes reaching its breaking point. Inside my soul, I worked. I didn't let the energy sit, I burned it. I stripped away the rage, the pollution, and the Council's control, transforming the black sludge into brilliant, pure, purified violet energy. It was the most intense cycling we had ever done. It felt like a supernova being born in my chest. Then, I pushed. I didn't release the madness. I released the cure. "The static ends now," I screamed. A massive circular pulse of purified violet light exploded from my body. It swept across the valley, through the fleet, and slammed into the tower hundreds of miles away. It wasn't an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of peace. The ships went silent as their manacores were neutralized. 1,000 soldiers fell to their knees as the screaming in their minds finally died. But as the world grew quiet, the heat behind my eyes became unbearable. A white-hot flash of agony tore through my optic nerves. I felt the violet light burn out the last of my vision, leaving me in total darkness. "Silas," I mouthed. The world tilted. The wind vanished. My body finally broke under the weight of the energy I had consumed. I fell into something warm, something solid. Silas's arms. Then the darkness swallowed me whole. The dark awakening. I didn't wake up for 3 days. When I finally drifted back to consciousness, the world was silent. No screaming static. Just the soft rhythm of waves and the scent of wild jasmine. I tried to open my eyes. Nothing changed. It was pitch black. A cold panic rose in my chest as I reached out with trembling hands. "Silas," I whispered. "I'm here, Ren. I'm right here." "The lights," I rasped, my heart pounding. "Why is it so dark? Is it night?" There was a long, agonizing silence. A drop of something warm landed on my hand. "Ren," Silas whispered, his voice breaking. "You saved them. Every Esper, every soldier. The static is gone, but the price." He choked. "Your eyes. The energy burned them out." I went still. I was blind. I would never see the sunrise again. Never see the constellations etched beneath Silas's skin. Never see the way his eyes darkened when he looked at me. Then Silas pulled me into his chest and held me tight. I felt every beat of his heart, every hum of his obsidian violet energy, and I realized something. I didn't need to see the world. I could feel it. "Don't cry," I whispered, tracing his face with my fingers. "I don't need eyes, Silas. I have you. You're the only light I ever wanted to see." 1 year later, the air in the cove smells like salt and peace. I can't see the ocean, but I hear the waves crashing against the cliffs. I can't see the sunset, but I feel its warmth on my skin. I sit on the porch of our home, the gold band on my finger warming in the sun. 6 months ago, on this very porch, Silas promised to be my eyes, my shield, and my heart for as long as we lived. The door creaks open. A familiar warmth settles behind me. "The roses are blooming, Ren," Silas murmurs. "Deep violet red, just like your aura." I smile. "Are they beautiful?" "They're nothing compared to you," he whispers, his hand sliding possessively over my waist. "The world is quiet, my love. Everyone is free, and you're the most precious thing in it." He lifts me easily and carries me inside. He lays me on the bed, his touch slow and reverent, every movement filled with devotion. He kisses my eyelids, one, then the other, before claiming my mouth. A kiss of absolute worship. My name is Ren. I paid a price to be free. But as I lie in the arms of the man who worships me, I know I was never a mistake. I was the cure he was born to find. And in this silence, we are finally, truly free. This isn't an end. It's a marriage of two souls who found light in the darkest of places.